This video has been automatically generated from an article written by Martin Freiland. That's me, on martinfreiland.com. According to the mainstream media, it was Vladimir Putin who initiated an invasion in Ukraine on February 24, 2022. According to alternative media, it was Ukraine that already used cluster bombs in the east of Ukraine in October 2014, after the Western orchestrated coup that replaced the pro-Russian government with a pro-Western one, and Russia was forced to intervene to protect the largely Russian-speaking population in the east. Russia annexed Crimea and sent troops, so Russia is seen as the instigator, according to the mainstream media, while the alternative media suggests that Putin may not be a saint, but his actions are understandable given all the false promises from the West and Ukraine's last-minute withdrawal from a peace deal. For those who can think critically and not easily succumb to the propaganda methods of the mainstream media, sympathy for the Russian response seems most plausible. NATO has increasingly encroached towards Russian borders, disregarding promises, and the Maidan Square coup was so clearly organized by the West that one must be blind to believe Western propaganda. Even the, in quotation marks, most reliable Eurocommissioner Frans Timmermans appeared extensively on Maidan Square when all this happened. War reporting also differs when looking at mainstream media versus alternative media. According to mainstream media, Kiev can still win and strikes deep into Russia regularly, while alternative media seems to paint a more realistic picture of Russian troops quickly gaining ground due to the inability of the Ukrainian army to replenish its forces. Not even with raids on conscripts trying to evade their patriotic duty at the front. Where it goes wrong is that we get carried away by stories from both sides. And those stories are sometimes confirmed by images. Who does not remember the long Russian military convoy that stood at the gates of Kiev, only to eventually withdraw? Why does not Putin just finish that potential blitzkrieg? Then he would have been rid of the problem in one go. But no, Putin did not want to provoke NATO and just wanted to clarify his frustration with the West with a statement. We too easily brush aside such events. This very event has shown that maybe we need to look further than our noses. What I am trying to clarify is that we get carried away by stories. Visual materials should support those stories. Footage of bombings where civilian targets are deliberately hit and children are killed. Combat actions filmed with drones. Exploding tanks. Soldiers with colored tape around their arms being arrested. What if both parties are mainly focused on producing images and propaganda, and our perception of the war is entirely shaped by stories and film productions? What if war zones are first emptied, and then the film production can begin? What was the consequence of the Russian convoy at the gates of Kiev? Millions of people packed their bags and headed towards Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and many other European countries. In Poland, there are over 1 million Ukrainians, mostly young men of fighting age. If you search a bit on YouTube, you will find loads of videos of celebrating Ukrainians. And watching travel videos from Ukraine shows no signs of war violence. Yes, but Ukraine is large, and all this happens in the eastern provinces, is the argument. What if it is all just perception planted in your brain by the maps you see in the media, or the maps shown by alternative sources? Have you been there yourself? Oh, you saw the images. Yes, but that is precisely the point. They are nothing more than images, and images can be easily created. You do not need AI for that. It has been possible since D-Day in Normandy, where cigar-smoking cameramen mingled among seemingly very relaxed soldiers. Everything you hear and see are stories and images meant to reinforce the stories. But what if the areas were already emptied, and populations were placed here and there for the images? Drama sells well, and as long as we hear experts confirming the stories in visually dramatized pieces, it goes down like a treat. What are our alternative sources? Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas MacGregor, Pepe Escobar, war experts, former military personnel, historians, journalists, and professors, and more of those professional talkers, who do nothing but launch stories and fill hours of podcast broadcasts day in and day out. So many deaths have occurred today in this and that region. The Russians have become masters of drone attacks. The Russians have set up production lines producing large quantities of drones and ammunition. The Russians have the Oreshnik, the hypersonic missile that can reach New York within 10 minutes. So many deaths have occurred on the Ukrainian side, and so many deaths on the Russian side. They are all stories supported by dramatic cinematic images. That is all it is. Meanwhile, in the past 3 years, you have been completely stripped bare with the alibi of the billions that had to go to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Germany has been taken off cheap gas, causing it to fall into a recession economically, even though it is being portrayed as not too bad. And the money bag keeps rattling. Dozens of billions are flying out, if not through so-called military support packages, then through money created out of thin air, supposedly backed by Russian frozen assets at Euroclear in Brussels, or the interest on them. Ultimately, it all comes from the pocket of the citizen, because all that money is not there and therefore supposedly needs to be borrowed. And that so-called borrowing is ultimately realized by creating money out of thin air. Printing more euros means dilution of value. Currency devaluation is inflation, is theft. It is time for you to realize that both the mainstream story and the story sold to you by alternative media do only one thing to you. It keeps you believing that there is a war going on. You only have the option to choose between multiple flavors, flavor A or flavor B. If you are of the gullible kind that swallows everything the mainstream media feeds you, then you choose flavor A. If you are the kind that takes the effort to delve into something, then you may, like Alice in Wonderland, run through the professionally set up rabbit holes of flavor B, searching for details presented to you by the perception managers spinning these storylines. It is not for nothing that it is usually former generals or other high-ranking military personnel who are the source of these stories. What if they are nothing more than professional propagandists who must keep you believing in the war illusion? My contention is that both sides of the story serve only one purpose: maintaining belief in the basic lie. There is no war. There's only an alibi for robbery, and that alibi continues until everything that could be robbed is emptied. Until the Western population is completely stripped and out of pure poverty, and despair accepts the social credit score and food vouchers in the form of digitally traceable money. A small layer of the population considered to be of the Semitic group may have it good and continue to live in luxury. The descendants of Shem, the second son of Noah, the Semites. Those are the Abraham descendants for whom Donald Trump signed those beautiful Abraham Accords. That contract between the descendants of Israel, the Jews, and Ishmael, the Muslims. They may have it good, while the rest is brought under slavery. That is the real agenda. The West is considered Edom by Jewish rabbis. The citizens in Edom are called the Edomites by them. According to these rabbis, the Edomites are the descendants of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, Jacob who later called himself Israel. That Westerners are Edomites is unproven, but is simply religiously historically assumed as truth by the rabbis. And because Jacob, Israel, supposedly received the divine blessing, actually stole from his twin brother Esau, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, are now left holding the bag. They must now serve Israel, the Jews. And under the Abraham Accords, the descendants of Ishmael have been added to that. The Edomites must serve the Jews and the Muslims, both descendants of Shem, Semites. Hence, anti-Semitism must be propagated so vigorously with film productions as well. The descendants of Shem, the Semites, must eventually receive a status of inviolability under the Noahide laws and therefore they must now be pushed into the victim role. This is done through the guise of internal strife, but the end goal is for the Edomites to serve the Semites. And that is the actual reason for the war illusion in Ukraine. Edom is stripped bare through belief in a non-existent war. Edom is stripped bare to such an extent that the Edomites, the Western population, will soon be backed into a corner and embrace the new slavery as a redeeming support. It is time for you to see it. Okay, that was it again. Share and like this video, and see you next time.